Hi, welcome to another week. This week's lecture topic is going to be around stress management. So when we first start to talk about stress, we want to identify what stress is. We can think of it as both a physical and a psychological reaction to the demands of life. And we actually have both positive and negative stressors. So the difference between stress, that's the response, stressors are what cause that response. Within stress management or within stress studies language, the positive types of stressors or things that encourage us towards healthy responses. Positive ones we talk about as being eustress, and negative ones we talk about as being distress. But I think if you think about your own experiences, you'll recognize there definitely are positive stressors in your life. So think about a game day or a competition day or even an exam. Those are examples of days where you sort of push yourself to be better. That's easy to see from a physical competition standpoint. Those exam days, which can sometimes feel like they're really negative, think about how much you would probably be procrastinating. Think of how likely it would be for you to actually be studying or reading your textbook if you knew there was never any kind of exam. Like those moments of competition, whether it be physical or whether it be showing your knowledge within a academic setting, those can be really positive things to push us to be our better selves. When it comes to those negative ones, I think we're all really quite qualified at describing what are some of the negative stressors within our life. But how do we identify those negative stressors, and how can we benefit, or how can we start to moderate that experience? One of the first things for you to be asking yourself is, what is it that caused the stress? Is it a specific person? Is it a type of situation that you're in? Is it the environment that you're in? What is it that's actually causing that stress? Because once you can clearly identify what that is, maybe you have the ability to sort of interact with that, to either avoid it, to reduce your exposure to it, to reframe your perceptions of it, whatever it may be. The next is to think to recognize for yourself, how do you feel both physically and emotionally? Um, what that allows us to do is we can sort of start to identify what are some of the cues that we can relate back to. Like if I know how I'm feeling when I start to get physically stressed, or if I know physically how I'm feeling when I'm starting to get stressed, or emotionally how I'm feeling when I start to get stressed, then I can start to understand earlier and recognize for myself earlier, hey, I'm starting to get stressed here. In unique or other situations, I can apply what I've learned from the past situations and be able to say, okay, now I know what's happening here. Now, can I go back and try to understand in this new or unique situation what's creating that? And do I have any ability to control or minimize that? The next in there is, what was your immediate reaction? So as you think back on your past stress or your most recent sort of negative experience, if we pay attention to what our immediate reaction was, then that also gives us an indication of how am I behaving? And when I'm stressed, am I behaving in ways that match with the character I want to reflect? Or are there ways that I know I can change my behavior? I may not be able to change the environment. I may not be able to change how I feel emotionally, but I can change my behavior. And maybe that's something that I want to be working towards. Lastly, identifying how do you make yourself feel better. Like we all get stressed. I get stressed, you get stressed. Each of us is facing stressors, and each of us makes it through those stressors. Each of us is successful every single day at navigating through stress, especially in times of more challenging stress. Knowing the strategies or things that really help you to get through that can be really helpful. So maybe you'll recognize for yourself that just some time out, maybe physical activity, maybe social contact with another person to talk through things, maybe journaling, maybe meditative practices, maybe et cetera, et cetera. Like what is it that really works? What are some of the strategies that really are effective for you to be able to deal with stress? Knowing those things is really going to make things a lot easier for you. The next thing I want to introduce you to is a concept called allostatic load. And allostatic load is essentially the sum of all the physiological damage that's going on within the body, as people get stressed and remain stressed or go through consistent experiences of stress. So remember, we said stress was both a physiological and a psychological phenomenon. Allostatic load is going to be talking about what is the damage, what's the problems that are occurring within the body as a result of ongoing stress. So it's interesting to look at how people respond to situations and how two individuals who are facing the same situation one will experience that as being stressful and another person may not experience that as being stressful. And that's tied back to our perceptions. So our perception is actually more of an influence on whether we experience stress or not than what actually happens. How you interpret what is happening can be really, really different from what is happening. Whether you interpret something as a high level of threat to you or not, it could actually be different on whether the situation indeed is any sort of threat to you or not. There's a couple of examples. Maybe the most common one is thinking about public speaking, but I'm going to rephrase that about maybe like answering questions in class. If you're asked with no warning to answer a question in class, for some people, that's incredibly threatening. Like they're really afraid of either not knowing the correct answer or being judged by others or just speaking in public in general. There's lots of things that can trigger that stress response where the actual event itself isn't a significant threat to your physical health. But even just thinking about whether we are going to be called on in class or just thinking about whether we have to make a presentation in public can trigger a stress response for us if that's a situation that we feel is being really stressful. A lot of what can influence our own perceptions is our own past. So past traumas are absolutely true. Past traumas are real. And current situations that we're put ourselves in can make us really fearful that the same type of thing that happened for that past trauma could be happening again. So that's why different people, that's part of why different people can have different perceptions about how threatening a particular event is. If you think about PTSD in particular, where we know the most common example from this being our military personnel returning from war conflicts. When you think about how that is expressed once they're back in the States in what you hope to be a really non-threatening, non-lethal environment, what can end up happening for some of those individuals is that there's something about the situation that they're in, whether it's just the look a person gives or the feel of the environment. It could be just the time of day or the way that it could be any number of thousands of different variables, but it just could trigger for them a strong memory of this past trauma. And even though the current situation may not be one that puts them in deep threat, it reminds them of this time of deep threat. So our own perceptions about how threatening we think something is in part built off of those past experiences. And if you've experienced past traumas, there's no minimizing the reality of those past traumas, but the current situations you are in may not actually be the same as what you are afraid of from what you experienced from in the past. When we think about lifestyles that you see on there, environmental conditions have a great impact on our own stress. For some of us, you experience this just in physical environments. So if you've moved up from having lived in a very warm and sunny environment your entire life, and then you come to Oregon and the winter comes in and the dark and colder and rainier environment, that environment alone can have an impact on how we perceive the rest of the day and whether we feel like we're experiencing more stress or less stress. We can expand that idea of what environmental conditions are beyond like the physical environment of, is it cold and dark and rainy, or is it sunny and bright and warm, to also thinking about the environment that you place yourself in socially. Do you put yourself in a position where it's relatively chaotic? Like, you don't plan things out well, you don't intentionally set up schedules much, you don't communicate, or you put yourself around other people who don't communicate, or who always like to sort of uh, create a lot of drama? Do you put yourself in environments where individuals are really supportive, really uplifting, really encouraging? Do you put yourself in environments where people use more sarcasm, or they're more belittling or more degrading? Depending on the environment that you put yourself in, whether it be whether you consider that physical or whether you consider that social, is going to have an impact on your stress level. I think it's just unbelievably interesting that we really only need to think we're in danger for the stress response to activate. Your thoughts are so important and so real to you. And I think recognizing that your own internal dialogue is as powerful as it is, we typically sort of, oftentimes at least, sort of dismiss our own internal dialogue. But I'd like you to recognize the way you talk to yourself and what you're saying to yourself is incredibly real and incredibly powerful. I like to say in a lot of my classes where we deal with this in a little bit deeper context, that I think that there's nobody else in this world that you believe and listen to as much as yourself. So what is it that you're telling yourself is something really important to think of. In line with that, if we're thinking about trying to manage our own stress levels, then paying attention to what we tell ourselves and how our internal dialogue is going is really important. The idea that you become what you believe is not necessarily entirely true. There are definitely physical limitations. You can't necessarily be anything that you want. But the idea that you oftentimes, and I oftentimes, sort of set limits on what we think we can achieve, or how well we think we're going to do at something, often translates into that becoming true. We talk ourselves into our own limits sometimes. So this idea is expressed well in stress management circles with the concept of self-efficacy. And self-efficacy can be sort of paraphrased as that belief that you can reach a goal or change a particular behavior, or if you have low self-efficacy, you don't think, like, I don't think I can achieve this. I don't think I can make that time. I don't think I can lift that weight. I don't think I'll do well on this assignment. I don't think I'm going to, I don't really understand this concept. And I'm not going to be able to. I'm not good at math. Like, those are all examples of internal dialogue that really translate into our own self-efficacy. They describe what you believe, and oftentimes we don't pay attention to that narrative that's going on inside of our own body very well. Now, related to this is this concept of hardiness. Hardiness is really a way of viewing events. So it can be a person who's expressing good hardiness would look at potential stressful events and see them as being meaningful, see them as being a chance for growth. They would see them as potentially even being interesting or something that you want to pursue. So I think when I think about hardiness, one of the ways that I describe it to others often, and one of the ways that I think of it for myself personally, is my grandparents would have described this as having, as with the paraphrase that they always told me, God never gives a person more than they can handle. That as you look at really challenging things, you can handle those, you can grow from those, you can learn from those, is what they were trying to express to me. I think our popular culture has a tendency to paraphrase it not in that way, but instead to paraphrase it with the phrase, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I think in both of those cases, they're trying to sort of express this concept of hardiness, which hardiness is actually something that can be learned. It's not that you either have hardiness or that you don't. You're anywhere along this continuum, and you can always continue to grow. It just requires intentional effort and intentional change of an intentional awareness of what your own narrative is, and an intentional change towards viewing challenging situations as something that can be positive, not something that are always negative. So all of this is related around your own self-talk, and it's very common. It's natural for our self-talk to oftentimes be fairly negative in nature. I'm personally somewhat curious. When we hear about Adam and Eve have eaten from the apple of knowledge and sort of had the separation from God, I always kind of wonder, like, was that the moment where this negative self-talk sort of stepped in, like this insidious, cancerous, unobtrusive but incredibly powerful force kind of came in and created this separation? I have no idea, but that's something that I've kind of wondered in the past. But oftentimes that negative self-talk, you can recognize pieces of this in yourself if you're looking for them. But most of us don't really pay attention to what we tell ourselves. You may be telling yourself, like, I don't have any time for this. I can't get that done because there's no time. I can't believe I said that to him or her that maybe you found attractive, or maybe it was somebody else on your team or whatever. I'll never make that time in a race. I'll never be able to make that weight in a lift. I'll never be able to get that move down as smooth as the other person when you're looking at a skilled movement. If you keep working towards moving towards positive self-talk, you will keep moving towards improving yourself and improving your confidence and improving your results. Part of that's going to mean that we have to work on thought stopping. So in sport psych, we'll look at, just as soon as you recognize any negative thought, that you intentionally and purposefully shift your language. The example you see on the slide here is that the negative self-talk that can be taking place can be, I missed the workout this morning. I'm just terrible at keeping a consistent workout schedule. Well, if you are recognizing your thoughts moving in any direction towards that, quickly shifting to, I missed the workout this morning, but I'll make sure to do my workout tomorrow, and I'm going to get back on track and back on a consistent schedule, and I can do this. Like that kind of positive self-talk and that immediate stopping of negative thoughts is a valuable practice where you keep experimenting with and keep growing in, because you can get better and better and better at it. Another aspect that could be really helpful as you try to deal with your own life and try to build more of your own self-management skills is to recognize that worry is different from caring. It's different from planning. And oftentimes we end up worrying about things that are outside of our control. So it can really, really help to transfer your thoughts on worry down to paper, because then you can really track, what are you worried about? What are you consistently worrying about? What of those things that you consistently worry about are really not in your control? What are those things that you consistently worry about are things that haven't happened yet and may never happen? Like, the more that you can sort of move from the emotion of worry to describing what it is you're worried about, can help you develop more and more control about what you can constructively work on improving, and what are things that you should just let go, things that just you don't have any control over them, and they may be things in the future that just could never even happen, and trying to shed that worry. But worry is not the same thing as caring about something. You can care about something without it having to feel like the emotion of worrying about something. And worrying is definitely not the same thing as planning. If we're worrying about the future versus we're planning for the future, planning is going to be intentionally setting your own productive and proactive actions. Planning means looking forward into the future, thinking about specifically what are you going to do in a productive and proactive manner, not thinking about the future and imagining what are the negative consequences of other people. So planning and worrying are not the same thing. Don't get those confused. And worrying is a habit. So it can be broken, but if you're going to change that habit, it's going to take effort and it's going to take intentional work. Now, aspect of stress management that's really valuable is thinking about your own time management. The way that we use our time and how effective we feel like we are at reaching our goals is oftentimes tied back to time management. So let's set up this generic or maybe ideal, maybe a better way to say it is an ideal version of a college day. We all get 24 hours, right? Every single person has 24 hours in a day, but every person uses that 24 hours differently. So, some people who are really effective and efficient at using their time, and others who are always stressed and worried about their time, always feel like they're behind, always feel like they are short on time. So let's imagine this 24 hours a day and what could be an ideal version of that. Well, we've already said we should be carving out at least 8 hours of that for appropriate recovery time through sleep. So this was one of our last lectures. We also know that we need to eat. And if we imagine, it's a really generous estimate of time, but even if we set an hour aside for every single meal, which would allow a lot of socialization time, would allow for a lot of mindful eating, would probably be significantly more amount of time than you're spending currently on meals. But we're going to say we're going to give 3 hours for meals. Then let's say you're at a 15 credit limit, or you're at 15 credits for the semester. That typically means that you're going to be looking at about 3 hours of class time per day. Walking, biking, whatever, transitioning between classes, between meal, moving from place to place, we're going to need to spend some time on that. So we'll give ourselves an hour for all of those kinds of things. We started this entire semester with talking about physical activity. So I'm hoping that's become a portion of your daily routine and part of your habit. So we're going to give an hour for you to be active. We're going to set aside some time for you to be earning some money too. So you may be working or doing work study job. We're going to, in this ideal version, we're going to set aside 2 hours a day for that. So you have some income that's coming in to allow for some of those other expenditures and things, just for entertainment. Well, if we add all that together, then that means that we're still left with a total of 6 hours left. Now, that 6 hours we can budget or we can use in all kinds of different ways. We can be using that for study. We can be using that for our social life. We can be using that for entertainment. But you got these 6 hours each day in this ideal version. On weekends, if we take all those 3 hours out of classes, then you're looking at 9 hours a day. So even as you look at those schedules and you identify, well, I don't think I'll be doing 3 hours of meals, or I have days where I'm not in class for 3 hours a day. Like some of these pieces, you may think that there's actually room for more than 3 hours, or on weekends that you may be getting even more than 9 hours. But I think this is a fairly acceptable estimate. As we look at all of that time frame, I also know that for our athletes, you could be spending 3, maybe even 4 hours some days with practice and with watching film and with all of the commitments that go into that choice. If you're in band or theater, or you're involved in clubs and developing leadership skills, like those are some of the areas that are going to fit into that 6 hours of extra time, or 6 hours plus if we're shaving some of those other areas down a little bit. But how are you spending that time? Are you choosing, and do you feel like your practices currently are using what time you have in productive and effective ways? Are you efficient with that time? Do you feel personally like you waste time? Do you get to the end of the day and be like, oh, I should have done this or I should have done that? Or you set down your phone and suddenly it feels like 2 hours have gone by when you don't feel like you were doing anything that was really all that productive. So as you think about how you use your own time, just think about how much time do you spend in entertainment, or how much time do you spend on screens, that maybe you can find better ways to manage that time and be productive with that time. From a class standpoint, studying and performing well academically is undoubtedly something that you'd like to be successful at. Hopefully it's not just something you want to be successful at, it's something that you feel is important to reach your long-term goals, that's going to actually be a part of your long-term goals. The knowledge, the concepts, the content, the abilities, the critical thinking, the creativity, all of those kinds of things that you're working on continuing to develop right now. Ideally, you see that as part of what your career is going to need, and your job, that you can see like, I will be using these things. But as we think about being successful academically, one of the practices that we want to continue to keep developing, is that of avoiding cramming. Distributed study time is consistently shown, overwhelmingly shown, to be the best way to learn. That means doing a little bit at a time over and over and over again is a whole lot better than doing a whole bunch of studying all at once. We just don't retain information, we don't grow, it's not the most productive or proactive way of dealing with developing ourselves into our best selves if we're cramming. So in alignment with that, instead of just thinking about only studying any kind of larger projects, the more that we can cut those into smaller and smaller tasks, and then schedule those tasks, have deadlines, have expectations, have checkpoints, and have them on paper or in your phone or with announcements or whatever, so that as you think, okay, it was a month before this big project was done, at the halfway point I should have been here. If the whole project was a month away, the halfway point would be 2 weeks. If I think about what would get me halfway to my halfway point, here's what I should get done in a week. And if I check on myself with that week to see what have I done and what have I not done, have I met that expectation of where I think I should be at? What did I do or not do? What was effective or not effective? What got in my way or didn't get in my way? What do I need to change for the next week? That gives me, like, each time, it gives me all this time in front to be able to keep making changes to be better and better and better. And you'll just keep improving your own ability to not procrastinate. Other things that we can do is really try to do some of the more difficult or unpleasant parts of the task first. Like, the sooner you can get that out of the way, the things that you enjoy more or you feel more confident at or more comfortable with are easier to do. So get the hard things out of the way first. Think about when are your best, most attentive, most productive times of the day. For most people, that's sort of between 10 and 2, but it might not be for you. When do you feel most alert? When do you feel most productive? Try and schedule some of those hardest things, especially during those times where you feel like you're going to be the best at them. Then limit the things that sort of zap your time. For many of us, that may be YouTube, that may be Netflix, that may be Instagram, whatever it is for you personally. Try to identify what those things are that are sort of sucking up your time in ways that you don't feel are productive towards what you want. And then look at strategies to reduce them. One strategy that could be really helpful would be check your screen time usage each week. Look at where you are spending time and look at the quantitative value of how much time did you spend. Then think back to yourself like, okay, is this the way that I want to be spending that time? If it is, there's no need to change. If it looks like an amount of time where you're like, oh, I could have been so much more productive if I'd used some of that time in some other ways, then look at ways to adjust how you're using that time. Then there's our sort of wasted time pieces. In life, that can be sort of waiting for the doctor while you're getting oil changed on the car. In academics, it might be that you have a 9 o'clock class and an 11 o'clock class, and you feel like, okay, well, I've got this 10 to 11 o'clock hour, but it's not enough time to go back to my dorm, or it's not enough time to do this, or it's not enough. And sometimes we'll use those down times in really unproductive ways, you can use those down times in ways that are much more productive. So just think about those, your own practices around some of those pieces. That brings us to the end of this week. I hope you have a great week. If you need any help, or if there's anything I can do to be helping you, let me know, and I look forward to it. Thank you.